everybody. All right. A short reading from something I recently picked up, Wealth, Poverty, and Politics by Thomas Sowell, his new book. A short reading from Chapter 2, Geographic Factors. It is obvious that people around the world have lived and developed over the millennia in different geographic settings. What is not so obvious is how much those settings have differed from one another, and the economic and social consequences of those differences. Geography is not egalitarian. Geographic features are not even approximately equal in different regions of the world. The disparities in geographic settings and in the phenomena which arise from those settings are at least as great as the income disparities that many people find so surprising. For example, far more tornadoes occur in the middle of the United States than in any other country or in all of the other countries of the world combined. Most of the geysers in the world are in Yellowstone National Park. Earthquakes are as common around the rim of the Pacific in both Asia and the Western Hemisphere as they are rare around the rim of the Atlantic. These natural phenomena are simply illustrations of disparities in the physical effects of great variations in geographic conditions. But there are also major economic and social effects of other disparities in geographically based phenomena. The very land that people stand on is not the same in different places. Highly fertile soils that scientists call mollisoils are neither evenly nor randomly distributed around the world. Such soils are found almost exclusively in the temperate zones of the northern and southern hemispheres and are scattered very unevenly there, but are virtually non-existent in the tropics. This was especially important during the ages when agriculture was the most prevalent and most important of human economic activities, which is to say for thousands of years, except for some more fortunate regions within the most recent centuries. The economies and cultures that evolved during those millennia did so within very different economic limits in different geographic settings. The economic effects of geographic differences are both direct, affecting standards of living, and indirect, affecting the development of peoples themselves, depending on whether a given geographic setting facilitates or impedes their communication and interactions with the rest of the human race. No society has had a monopoly on the discoveries and inventions that have advanced human beings. So for a given set of people, whether a class, a race, or a nation, to be in touch with what other people around the world are doing has been a major advantage. A larger cultural universe is important, not simply because of the products, technologies, and knowledge that are transferred, important as these are, but also, and perhaps equally or more important, because people seeing repeatedly how things have been done differently by others in different places can break through the normal human inertia that keeps people doing the same things in the same familiar ways for generations or even centuries, as happens in many geographically isolated societies. It has been said that, quote, intellectual force, unquote, is something that, quote, feeds upon the nutritious food of wide comparisons, unquote. Conversely, isolation tends to have the opposite effect. When the Spaniards discovered the isolated Canary Islands in the 15th century, they found the people there living much as people had lived in the Stone Age. Similarly, when the British discovered the isolated Australian Aborigines in the 18th century, in other isolated settings as well, whether in distant mountain villages or deep in tropical jungles, people had been found living as others had lived in earlier centuries or millennia. Deserts are another geographic factor isolating peoples. The largest of the world's deserts by far is the Sahara Desert, which is a negative factor for the people of North Africa, but a devastating handicap for the people to the south, Black Africans in tropical sub-Saharan Africa, This incomparably vast desert, slightly larger than the 48 contiguous states of the United States, has been for centuries the largest single factor isolating the people of sub-Saharan Africa from the rest of the world. The dearth of good harbors in tropical Africa also limited contacts with overseas cultures. As Fernand Braudel put it, quote, external influence filtered only very slowly, drop by drop, into the vast African continent south of the Sahara, unquote. Despite geographic influences, there can be no geographic determinism because where people are in touch with other peoples, even an unchanging geographic setting interacts with changing human knowledge and differing human cultures that have different values and aspirations, producing very different outcomes at different times and places. Most of what are natural resources for us today were not natural resources for the caveman, who had not yet acquired the knowledge of how these things could be used for his own purposes. There have been vast deposits of petroleum in the Middle East from time immemorial, but it was only after science and technology had advanced to a level that created industrial nations elsewhere the Middle East's oil became a valuable asset, profoundly changing life in both the Middle East and in the industrial countries. Individual geographic influences cannot be considered in isolation, since their interactions crucially affect outcomes. The relationship between rainfall and soil is just one example of these interactions. Not only does rainfall vary greatly from one place to another, so does the ability of the soil to hold water that rains down on it. This crucial ability to hold water is much less in the limestone soils of the Balkans than in the loess soils in northern China. Since climate and soil affect how well different crops can be grown in different places, that has virtually precluded equal prosperity in all regions of the world during the millennia when agriculture was the most important economic activity around the world and the basis for the urban development of different societies and peoples. As with many other things, the ability of land to hold water is a benefit only within some given range of variation. Back in Roman times, the very flat lands of northwestern Europe, located in an area of plentiful rainfall, resulted in many swamps and swampy places, which were major impediments to agriculture. Only after centuries of development and application of drainage techniques did much of this land become fertile. Fertility is not always something inherent and immutable. The development of drainage and irrigation techniques, or of plows that can be harnessed to horses or oxen to plow heavy soils, greatly affects their fertility. It was the interaction of the soil, rainfall, and changing human knowledge and technology over time that made the lands of northwestern Europe become very fertile. What this means more generally is that the possible combinations and permutations of geographic factors greatly exceed the number of factors considered separately, especially when combined with the changing human knowledge over time. Therefore, the large number of possible economic and other outcomes in differing geographic settings makes equal outcomes for different regions and peoples around the world even less likely than a separate enumeration of geographic differences might suggest. There has been nothing resembling equal opportunities to become equally productive among the tribal, racial, or national groups that developed for thousands of years in different parts of the world and evolved their respective cultures in different geographic settings. Not only have equal economic outcomes been rare to non-existent, the particular patterns of inequality in one era have differed greatly from the particular patterns of inequality in another era. The vast superiority of ancient Greek society to that in ancient Britain reflected Greece's geographic advantage in being located near the Middle East when agriculture developed and spread into nearby southeastern Europe centuries before it spread to all of Europe and beyond. Without agriculture, it is difficult, if not virtually impossible, to have densely populated urban societies as distinguished from societies of wandering hunters and gatherers or herders, all of whom require vast amounts of land on which to roam in order to get enough food to sustain a given number of people. To the present day, cities have remained the source of much, if not most, of the advancements in civilization. Far more of these advances, and especially of landmark scientific and technological achievements, have occurred among the population of cities than among a similar population of people living in other settings. People without the geographic prerequisites for cities have long lagged behind peoples in settings that have facilitated urbanization. Cities developed relatively late in the existence of the human species, and so did most of the advances in what we today recognize as civilization. By making cities possible, agriculture made possible the great industrial, medical, and other advances that flourish in urban environments. Wealth, Poverty, and Politics, from Chapter 2, Geographic Factors. Music from the soundtrack to Ghost in the Shell, Innocence.